speaker for the discussion today. First of all, I would like to introduce our first speaker is joining us from Seoul, Mr. David Lee. And our colleague is going to put him on screen. Yes, maybe I introduce our another speaker, Professor Lisa Leung. She is the Associate Professor at Department of Cultural Studies in Lingnan University. And besides teaching media and film, she also co-authored a book on South Asian minority groups in Hong Kong. So, thank you. And here we have David Lee from Seoul. And he is the reporter and writer of SCMP, South China Morning Post from Seoul. And his writing covered social issues and popular culture in South Korea. And he's joining us through Zoom from Seoul. Thank you and welcome, Mr. Lee. And now we have our moderator today, Ms. Teresa Kwong. She is the Program Director of Hong Kong Art Center, and she is a curator of many different films. So thank you. So I'll pass it to Ms. Teresa. Thank you.
Okay, so hi, so welcome you all to the screening today, which is also thanks for the invitation of the Asian Society Hong Kong. Today's screening basically it's part of Beyond K-pop, Korean Family in Films. So I think I'm so happy to have the chance to have a conversation with David. Hello, 안녕하세요. Hello, and also Lisa, as well. Yeah. So maybe first of all, I am going to ask both David and Lisa about the social context and the social issue brought up by the Korean film that you all just saw called Plon, which is a 2020 film, year 2020, a Korean film. So maybe just to help all of you maybe to understand the social context and the situation about that film, and then we will also have a discussion about the especially the ethnic group in the film, which is a Chinese Korean in the film. So maybe we will starting from that, and then later on, I think especially we would be interested how the media representation of these minority in the media. And then later on, maybe we will also extend the situation in Hong Kong and to briefly talk about how the ethnic minority being present in the Hong Kong media. And then later on, I will open to the floor and to see any of you got any question or comment about both the film or the social issue that we brought up from the conversation. Yeah. So first of all, maybe I got a few questions, about just the film, especially about the background of the film. As far as we all know, the film. The story basically takes place in the 90s, and the main protagonist, basically, she is a Chinese, what they call Chinese Korean, or there's a special name called Joseonjok. Yeah, so it's a very interesting term. So could David give us a brief, introduction about, the history, why there's a group of Chinese moved to Korea, and what kind of the experience that they have encountered in Korea. Yeah, David.
Yeah, hi. First of all, thank you for having me today. It's great to be here. So just to get started on the history of Joseonjo, with the Japanese invasion of Korea in 1910, that's when a lot of Koreans, for political, for economic, maybe even social reasons, a lot of them migrated to China, especially Northeast China. But after, Korea was liberated from Japan in 1945, that's when they had the choice to come back. And to my knowledge, I think about 2 million of the Koreans, they decided to stay in China because they had already settled there. They already had their families there. But obviously a large group decided to come back. And that's when they kind of got the title of Joseonjok, when they were living in China. And today, there are 2.5 million foreign residents in Korea, and about 1 million are from China, and about 700,000 are Joseonjok. And they usually live, they have communities in Korea, especially in Seoul and neighboring Incheon, but the biggest group is in Seoul, especially, and they have like these very representative communities. One is Daerimdong, and that's the city that I visited for the article that I wrote on Joseonjok, and that's kind of where a lot of South Koreans are aware about. That's where South Koreans think that a lot of the Joseonjok live in Korea, which is true. And yeah, what was the other part you kind of wanted me to mention, Teresa?
We last time you said that basically for Korean people, they will know they will know the Joseonjok right away. For example, how they look, about the makeup, and also about the language they are using or the accent. Yeah, could you also briefly talk about that?
Right. And this is especially true for people, more of the people my parents' age. I guess they're kind of the first generation or the second generation, meaning that they came from China, and then they tried to assimilate in the South Korean society. So like I said, they live in these communities, most of them, not all of them, but most of them. And you can, it's very discernible, like the other parts of Seoul compared to these parts of Seoul where a lot of the Joseonjok live. There are no Starbucks, or, I mean, there may be, but when I visited Daerimdong, the biggest city for Joseonjok, I didn't see any Starbucks or McDonald's or
you
any
mean
of
how
those.
many years ago? Let's say, yeah. Is it that there are still no Starbucks in the area they live, or you say, let's say 10 or 20 years ago?
Oh, so this is from 2 years in 2019 when I was
okay.
writing my
recent.
article.
Okay.
So it's just a more traditional. So like one of the people I interviewed on the streets, he's Korean. He kind of said that he lives near Daerimdong, and he kind of mentioned that it reminds him of Seoul in the 1970s. So I'm sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought. Yeah, so these Joseonjok who are first and second generation, the food they eat, the clothes they wear, and you all, a lot of people know that South Korea is very famous for its high beauty standards. We have the term K-beauty, so makeup, just how they present themselves, and obviously the accent is a huge factor. How they speak, a lot of the wordings are different. So those are kind of the differences. But the third generation, so the children who were born in South Korea and who grew up here, they are much alike, a lot of the South Korean children. So they're kind of similar in many ways to the majority of South Koreans. But yeah, I would say the first and second generation, you can tell apart right away.
Okay, so it seems that they have a very, as you said, just like what we say for Chinese people, they are living abroad. They most of them they were based in what we say the Chinatown. So it seems that for Chosunjuk, they also have their own area, and they are kind of very close to each other. But how do they encounter any discrimination while with the Korean people? Yeah, let's say.
Yeah, and I think this usually happens at the workplace. And when I say workplace, a lot of the first and second generation, they worked in factories, a lot of the labor intensive workplaces, because just the way that a lot of the more white collar workplaces in South Korea, a lot of academic background is required, and South Koreans are very strict about specs. In other words, credentials, what kind of school you're from, what kind of grades you made, what your test score. So a lot of these Joseonjeok, they relied on these, more lower class jobs. And that's where a lot of the discrimination happens. And a lot of this is shown on media and in movies and dramas. So I think one of the biggest reasons is Joseonjeok who are even born in South Korea, but have parents who are, who are nationally Chinese, they're still foreigners because South Korea's citizenship is based on blood rather than where the location of where you were born. So in order to maintain your visa, you have to, obviously be working in South Korea, and that all depends on the employer. So the employer will a lot of times exploit the workers. For example, I know I interviewed a lot of people who were working for, almost $40 per month, just so that they could, they could maintain their visa status. And I've heard a lot of stories about the employees. Like if a woman was working as a janitor, they would be ignored, and a lot of the workers there would call her names, more discriminatory names, using Joseonjeok kind of as a way to say you're kind of second class. And in school, for children, school bullying, because they're Joseonjeok, they, like I said before, they dress different, they speak differently. So school bullying is another big factor. But yeah, mostly in the workplace, that's where I would say the discrimination happens.
Okay, so let's talk about the film. Yeah, so the film that we have just seen, it's taken place in the 90s. Yeah, David, last time you also mentioned that for Chosunjuk, is in the 90s. A big group of them, coming back, to live in Seoul or Korea. So could you briefly also, share with us what has been happening in the 90s and what happened to why there is a big group of, Chinese Korean moved to live in South Korea?
Right. Yeah. So the South Korean economy, it did start developing a lot in the 80s, but actually a lot of South Koreans look to the 1988 Olympics, Summer Olympics, as kind of the starting point for where we kind of skyrocketed to becoming a developing country, and where our economy grew. Our conglomerates like Samsung and LG, that's when they kind of skyrocketed. So that was a big contributing factor. Also in 1991, because we needed more laborers, we drafted legislations where we could provide visas for immigrants who had from countries that had good relationships with South Korea. And leading to that is in 1992, when China and South Korea their diplomatic relations were amended, and that's when, in the 1990s, a lot of the Joseonjuk, they came back to South Korea for economic opportunities.
Okay. Okay, so thank you, Derek. So I hope you all kind of got a brief idea of the social situation of the film the plot is about. So so starting from the issue of Joseonjuk, I have a question for Lisa, because Lisa it's an expert in studying the ethnic minority community in Hong Kong. So as an expert in this area. So how would you understand, the issue of ethnic minority community, how they, tackle all the difficulty in the society, from the film? Could you share a little bit about your observation?
Okay, thanks, Teresa, and thanks, David, for the background, for giving us the background of Joseonjuk. I have been researching into South Asian minorities in Hong Kong, but I think the kind of parallel I can see from this film to Hong Kong is actually about the mainland Chinese immigrants here in Hong Kong. I think my friends here might know a lot more about the background, but I'm just going to share a few things here, and then I'll see if I can sort of migrate onto South Asians, because I actually do see a lot of parallels of the situation and the problems they encounter as ethnic minorities in our respective areas. Maybe I'll just start with mainland Chinese immigrants and why I see a closer parallel, because I think the Joseonjuk are actually ethnically very similar to the Koreans, and many of them actually went to China, or the ancestors are actually Koreans, but they went to China for various reasons, as David also shared with us. But then when they returned to Korea in the 90s, or even or earlier, they were seen as China Koreans, or Joseonjuk. So ethnically, they're actually more or less the same. And here in Hong Kong, you can I can see that that mainland Chinese immigrants face a similar kind of prospects here in Hong Kong. Of course, the situation as we see is actually very complex, right? The kind of very entangled tension between mainland Chinese and what we see now as local Hong Kongers, a very contentious issue. But then you see also that there have been waves of immigration from the mainland ever since, of course, time immemorial. But then what we're seeing was sort of a mass exodus to Hong Kong from the mainland was actually around the 1950s and the 60s, because of the war between communists and the nationalist parties, and now of course Communist Party took over. So and then you see waves of immigration, but then you can also see how what they faced even up to now. Mainland Chinese immigrants. We're also talking about class here, of course. And many of the sort of lower class mainland Chinese immigrants came here. They were given a lot of names, and they faced a lot of what we called discrimination, going to schools, and then of course finding jobs, and what I see as kind of layers of discrimination, right? And then it just works, spiraling up from sort of education. And I just read some of the surveys here now. Even in this year, they did a lot of surveys on the situation of mainland Chinese immigrants. They still face a lot of discrimination from being refused, like mainland Chinese children being refused entry into mainstream schools. And then of course you see employment issues. A lot of them, get underemployed, or they're just hired to do menial jobs, basically jobs that do not match their own qualifications. And then what is more, what is, I think is more troublesome is the kind of what we call everyday kind of discrimination, right? Like, when you walk in the streets, if you talk to people, people realize that you've got a different accent or you dress differently, then you're basically treated differently. So I can see a lot of parallels in this film too. The Chosun Juk, the female lead, the pawn, and the fact that she was already of sort of noticed as a Chinese Korean in the brothel, right? Oh, you're Chinese Korean. Oh, okay, clean the dishes. All right. So without further ado, they're assumed and expected to do the jobs that mainstream people do not like. I think the question here is that why is that? Why they are ethnically similar, but then they get so different treatment. And you can also see a similar situation facing South Asian residents, the communities here in Hong Kong. Of course, the issue is different. And it's also very complex. The reason why I research into South Asians is because of the history in Hong Kong. Basically, a lot of what I term as South Asians is basically Indians, Pakistanis, and Nepalese. These three South Asian ethnicities came to Hong Kong basically as a result of British colonization. Of course, a similar story here, many of them came to work in the army, to work in the police force, work as police guards, but others also, the traders, the businessmen also came. And then after years of settlement here, many still remain in menial jobs. Now, of course, if friends are interested, you can ask why. And so you're also talking about, barriers, glass ceilings in terms of education, right? A lot of them do not end up, having, entering into university simply because of the very stringent and, high standard Chinese requirements at the universities. And as you see, as also understand, South Asian students, end up failing the Chinese exams, and then they've basically denied, entry into universities. And without a university degree, then of course you're meant to, to suffer, less employment. Even now, where in many of our research on South Asian youths, many of them do have university degrees, but then they end up not, there's a very, very small chance that they can end up getting a job that actually match their qualification. So then they end up, working in jobs that basically are typecast, right? If we think about, the South Asian communities, we often, immediately think of them working, in construction, as security guards, and women working as cleaners, street cleaners. And now, of course, with the COVID situation, a lot of them go into food delivery. And so you see these, what we call structural issues here. It's not individual, it happens across generations. And we're also talking about the kind of everyday discrimination that they see. Simply, if they look, darker skinned, then they're called names, they're labeled. Sometimes, they're told to go home, and then they said, but here's my home. So I think I'll stop here. Maybe, we can continue discussing.
Okay, so I would like to ask if any of you would like to have any comment, question. Yes, please, this gentleman.
Thank you. Yeah, my question is actually about another group of Koreans, to make it even more complicated, which nobody has mentioned yet, but is kind of the elephant in the room in a sense, which is David mentioned that it was about 1945 that the first Chosun-chuk actually settled in China. Is that correct? I think you said 1945, around there.
That's when they were able to come back.
Oh, come back. Sorry. Okay. But of course, they were able to come back in 1945, but only a few years later, the Korean War happened and Korea became a divided country. So I'd like to know two things. What proportion of the Chosun-chuk were actually from the north? And secondly, why the huge difference, apparently anyway, to an outsider? I don't know all that much, except what I've been informed from you, mostly. But my perception is that if a North Korean were to defect to South Korea, they'd be treated very differently than if a Chosun-chuk decides to return to Korea. And yet the division didn't happen. The division of one happened in 1953 or something, and the other division happened not all that long before that.
Sorry, so the last part of the question was how
Well,
Yes.
well, firstly, my perception, and I could be wrong, please correct me if I'm completely wrong, but my perception is that a North Korean who somehow made it to South Korea, and my understanding is that most of the people who do that go via China anyway, the refugees, are treated, in my understanding, very differently to the Chosun-chuk. Is that correct or is that not correct? And the second part is, if it is correct, then given the relatively small difference in time-wise in history between the division of Korea, unfortunately, and also the reason for the Chosun-chuk ending up in China as refugees from the Japanese, not all that many decades before, why the huge disparity in treatment?
Okay. So actually, well, first of all, I want to say that I'm actually not an expert in ethnic minorities in South Korea or Chosun-chuk, as a matter of fact, but I do have an interest in those subjects. So I do write some articles and I do talk to some professors who are, experts. But from my experience, actually, I found that for the people that I've met, for the North Korean defectors and the Chosun-chuk from China, I kind of felt that they were kind of treated in many ways, I think, similar by the mainstream South Koreans. And I think a good example is I was volunteering for this after-school program for North Korean, the children of North Korean defectors, because a lot of the North Korean defectors, they also settle for more of the lower class jobs, and they require to work. First of all, I should say that a lot of the North Korean defectors, they're mostly single mother. A lot of them are single mothers, which is also kind of true for a lot of the Chosun-chuk people as well. So, the mothers don't have time to take care of their children, so they, rely on these after-school programs. And I felt that, the same thing happens where the first and the second generation of both, minority groups, they're discriminated a lot. But the third generation is when they get, a lot of help from, maybe not a lot, but they get some help from the government to attend these after school programs. So their integration into the education system is a lot more smoother. So actually, one of the interviewees I had, he is a professor at Seoul National University, which is widely known as the best, or one of the best institutions in our country, and he's a Chosun-chuk third generation. And what he was saying is that a lot of these third generations from both groups, they kind of are having more opportunities in South Korea. Yeah, I just think that the family situation is a lot similar, and the fact that they're both in ethnically they're both they're both Korean, but I think this is where kind of, like Lisa said, class triumphs over ethnicity, nationality, and that's how. And I think a big part is how a lot of the mainstream South Koreans are not exposed to both groups. A lot of them, not even me. Like the first people I saw were for both groups were when I started doing when I started writing my articles about them. So they don't have exposure to them. So the only exposure that they have is the media, and South Korean media. According to movie editors and a lot of experts, we have a very close social perspective. So a lot of these characters who appear on screen, they're mostly laborers, factory workers, wives of multicultural families, criminals. So it's just a very narrow perspective towards both of these groups, and I just feel like from my personal experience, I feel like there are a lot of similarities of how they're treated in South Korea.
Is there any question? Oh, yeah, please.
Hello, thank you very much for the sharing. I've just got two questions. The first one actually rides on the previous question. I just want to get right about how the term 조선족 is defined, because my usual understanding of a 조선족 is that if it refers to, like, after of course the descendants of those who moved from Korean Peninsula to northeastern China in the early 20th century, but they usually move to Korea in the 80s or 90s and so on. So I just want to make sure one thing is that you talk about 1945, because so I was just thinking, has someone really moved to, at that time called Manchuria, in the early 20th century, then moved back right after 1945? My gut feeling is that that isn't classified as 조선족, right? When they moved back to Korea in the 50s, right? It would be only after that they stayed on from the 50s to the 80s and then moved back in the 80s, 90s, and that would be defined as 조선족, right? So I would just want to get the definition right, the first point. My second question concerns lamb skewers, 양꼬치. So I would like to ask why I've heard that quite a lot of the 조선족 nowadays they run lamb skewer shops in South Korea. I was wondering why they would like to run lamb skewer shops. Thanks.
Okay, just 1 second. I'm looking up really quick.
I guess you will have to answer that.
So actually, but I actually looked this up before. But to my understanding, the terminology came when, so after 1910, or even before that, when the Koreans immigrated to China, the Chinese people called them 조선족, because Joseon was the name of our nation. Before Korea, it was called Korea. So that's how they identified the Koreans in China. So the Chinese people called them 조선족, and even before they came over to South Korea. Yeah.
So the second question, right? The second question, it's about yeah. Lamb.
Oh, okay. So that question was also
specialty.
Oh, so I'm sorry. I thought that question was directed to Lisa, but so the question was why lamb skewers are a specialty in Korea?
Are they a specialty? Are they sort of specifically labeled as good at doing lamb skewing?
Oh, okay. Not? Yes. So I'm sorry about that. I think at the beginning. Now it's a very mainstream food in Korea, but I think in the beginning, because it was kind of introduced by a lot of in Chinatown, and a lot of South Koreans, we identify the lamb skewers with Qingdao, like the Chinese beer. So yeah, I think we do kind of have that connection, but right now it's a very mainstream kind of food in South Korea.
Okay. Is there any other question? Yeah.
Is there any reason why most of the Chinese Korean who moved back to Korea are single mother? Is it because all the men died in the war? Just wondering.
I know that early on, like in the 1990s, a lot of the families were separated. So actually, I don't know the exact reason, but I know that because when they came in the 1990s, a lot of them came here, and then they were illegal. So they couldn't go back to China. So I think they were separated that way. But today, so I don't know if I said a majority of them were single mothers, but I said a lot of them, the people that I talked to, were single mothers. Maybe I know that divorce is one of the big reasons, because, for example, if a woman marries a South Korean man, and when they come over here, a lot of them, there were a lot of cases where they were abused. And they also a big factor. But I don't know like the exact numbers, what proportion of the Joseonjuk are single mothers, but I know that there are a lot of them.
Any other question?
If you don't mind, may I ask
Sure.
the last question? Maybe we can go back to the theme itself. I remember like last time when we have a discussion with David and Lisa and Teresa, David mentioned this movie, how they portray Joseonjuk is a little bit different from the other Korean media. So I was just wondering, how is not just Joseonjuk, or maybe even the non-Korean people and non-Chinese people, how are they portrayed in contemporary Korean media and Hong Kong media, and also maybe in the future? Is that like what's the directions going? Especially, I know there's Indian actors is quite popular from Squid Game now. So is that going to change any perception or discrimination?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, maybe I further to Pauline's question. I wanted to start from this film. Because David has been mentioned, normally in the Korean film, normally they will have a stereotype or have a very narrow perspective of what Joseonjuk is. But so what do you think about how the film that we have just seen, what do you think about the presentation of Joseonjuk, in the film plot? We just, Could you share a little bit about,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought I think compared to past movies, it was a great change in my opinion. The main character, who's Joseonjuk, she was, her role is more of, she needs more protection. She's also smart, I guess rather successful later in life. So it was just a very bright change of how they portrayed minorities in movies. And especially for Joseonjuk, I watch a lot of Korean movies, and I've only seen Joseonjuk as gangsters or criminals in movies. And actually it's kind of funny why that kind of happened. There are some cases where in the news, like someone hired Joseonjuk to murder someone, but those news are very, they're sensationalized by South Koreans, like I mentioned, South Koreans don't really have exposure to a lot of them. So when they see this kind of thing, headlines in the news, they're rather quick to jump on it and sensationalize it and kind of spread it. And those cases, there are only a handful of them in a year, and but they decided to make movies about them. And it's funny because when I was trying to go to Taerindong, the Joseonjeok community, a lot of my friends told me to be careful. And I actually even, was kind of wondering if it was actually, kind of dangerous, but, it wasn't at all. So yeah, I thought it was a very bright change for the movies.
Yeah, I think, well, even though, last time when we talk about this film, maybe this film, it's not, the best, the blockbuster in Korea, let's say last year, but still, we both think it's a good breakthrough because the film is a CJ Entertainment film, which is a big studio film, and the filmmaker is the kind of mainstream Korea and making a different portrait of Joseonjeok. So may I ask, how about the situation of Joseonjeok? Is any of them become a filmmaker, artist, actor, or actress? So they could tell their story publicly to the wider community. So as far as you know, is there any Joseonjeok, artist, filmmaker, or whatever, has their voice be kind of expressed or being heard? Just like the situation in Hong Kong, even though the ethnic minority people, no matter they are Chinese or South Asian people, they still have a certain kind of stereotype. But in recent years, some of them, they could make their own film, or they also be part of the Hong Kong popular culture. So I'm intrigued of the situation of Joseonjeok in the contemporary Korean society. Yeah.
So how the situation is today, right? That's kind of your question.
Yeah, the question is, I would like to know wherever is there any Chinese Korean people, they could be part of the entertainment business, no matter they are, the backstage, the curation people, or they are the actor, where they could express their voices to the wider community.
Yeah. So as far as I know, I am a culture enthusiast and I do like watching movies and dramas. I don't know of any like majorly popular, celebrities or artists who are Joseonjeok, but I do know of some actors who had smaller roles who they said that they were Joseonjeok. And I think one thing I can add to this is that from the people that I've interviewed, especially, college aged or younger, they don't usually, identifying themselves as Joseonjeok is not the first thing they're going to do in Korea. Because, South Koreans do class, how do you say, I guess, label, Joseonjeok, they kind of tie it to China as well. And I wasn't as prepared as Lisa to look at the surveys, but I'm pretty sure that if we took a poll, towards the view of China or Joseonjeok, South Koreans would not have a very favorable view. So yeah.
Maybe I could just talk a little bit about what South Asians, I guess, how the mainstream media tends to portray South Asians, and you can, of course, guess, the same formula rules, right? South Asians do not tend to appear in TV dramas or films, and when they do, of course, they always, play the very minor roles, and when they do appear, they are always, sort of playing the role of bad guys involved in crimes, or they appear as, as comedians. So it's a part of course, part of the kind of everyday kind of discrimination that we see, that media images often reinforce the kind of stereotypes we have on ethnic minorities. So, I mean, in recent years, just like Pauline said, we can see some kind of some nuanced changes when you see, like South Asian actors, one Indian actor appearing in a film that's basically a romance film, right? It talks about the kind of possible or impossible romance between an Indian and a man and a Chinese woman, right? So it's still played in a kind of popular genre, a romance film, right? But then if you look around in mainstream media, what Teresa was trying to allude to was whether or not, ethnic minority communities can actually enter into mainstream media industry. And you can see a very, very small fraction of it. When you talk about, the barriers to enter into mainstream employment, I think media is even worse. Right, given, of course, we all know the atmosphere now, and it's just the big media corporations that can actually survive, especially in the film industry. So I think the picture is actually quite grim. But of course, you're also looking at, the growth of social media and YouTube films, and you see, not mainstream, South Asian youth appearing as YouTubers or KOLs, doing their rap, doing their own music videos, or even doing their small videos introducing Indian cultures and everyday life as an Indian in Hong Kong. So I think a lot of youth have already sort of given up on mainstream media industry and go on their own on social media platforms. I guess it's probably similar in South Korea too.
Is there any other question or comment from the floor? Yeah. If not, I will once again. We are very happy that the Asia Society Hong Kong organize this kind of program that encourage what we say the social inclusion and also arouse our social awareness about what's happening. This time it's what's happening in Korea. So thanks very much for Asia Society Hong Kong to organize such a meaningful event. And as far as I know, Asia Society Hong Kong will continue presenting this kind of program. So stay tuned with them. And thanks again for joining us tonight. And also thank you for David and Lisa. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa, for doing such a great closing remarks for us. Yes, we are going to have 2 more screenings in this film series. We're going to show Family in the Bubble and also Minari. In November, we're going to show The Family in the Bubble, which is a documentary directed by a young director in South Korea, Min Ji-ma. And actually, it is a documentary that recorded her own family after her family was lost everything in the financial crisis in the 90s, and to see how did that affect their relationship between herself and her parents. So hope we'll see you again. And once again, thank you, David, Lisa, and Teresa, and hope we'll see you later. Thank you.